The old alien warrior walked into the classroom slowly. His forearms moved with careful steps as he carried his teaching materials. Commander Zethkar had fought in more wars than most beings could count. His thick shell showed deep scars from laser burns and blade cuts. Each mark told a story of battle and survival. The young students from different worlds sat quietly in their seats. They came from 12 different planets across the galaxy. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others had multiple eyes or strange skin colors. But they all shared one thing. They wanted to become military officers. Zethkar set his materials on the desk and looked at the eager faces before him. His voice came through the translation device attached to his throat. The machine turned his clicking sounds into words the students could understand. "Today you want to hear about humans," he said. His voice carried a strange mix of respect and fear. "You have read reports about their weapons. You have studied their ships and battle plans. But none of you have seen them fight." A young student from the Veltar system raised one of her purple tentacles. "Sir, our military books say humans are only a Class 7 fighting species. That means they are not very dangerous, right?" The old commander made a clicking sound that meant dark humor in his language. "Young one, those books mean nothing when you watch a human die in battle. They mean even less when you watch a human refuse to die." He turned on the big display screen at the front of the room. Pictures of star maps appeared, showing the far edges of known space. "I will tell you 3 stories today. 3 times I fought beside humans in war. 3 times I learned why every species in the galaxy fears them." The first picture showed a huge space station floating near a gas giant planet. The station had many levels and docking ports for ships. It looked like a small city in space. "This was Kepler Station 15 years ago," Zethkar began. "The Hegemony Empire had surrounded us with their war fleet. They had 3 times more ships than we did. We had maybe 6 hours before they would break through our shields and destroy us." He paused, and his 4 eyes seemed to look far away, remembering things from long ago. The station commander was a human named Jake Morrison. When he saw how bad our situation was, he asked for volunteers for what he called aggressive defensive action. One of the students, a young being with gray skin and large black eyes, spoke up. "What does aggressive defensive action mean?" Zethkar's mandibles clicked again. "I had the same question back then. I volunteered because I thought I knew about war. I had fought in 17 major battles. I had won medals for bravery twice. But I had never fought next to humans before that day." The old commander activated another control, and the room filled with a 3-dimensional image. It showed the inside of the space station during the battle. Red emergency lights flashed everywhere. Smoke filled the air. Alien and human crew members ran between control panels trying to keep the station working while enemy fire shook the walls. "The Hegemony expected us to give up," Zethkar continued. "In their culture, when you cannot win, you surrender. This makes sense to most species. Why die when you can live? They sent us a message offering fair terms. We could leave the station and take our civilians with us. No one would be hurt." The image showed Captain Morrison standing at the main control center. He was a man of average height with brown hair and serious eyes. His uniform was torn and bloody, but his voice stayed calm as he gave orders to his crew. A young woman with short black hair worked at a nearby control panel. Her face was dirty with soot and sweat, but her hands moved quickly and surely across the buttons and screens. "Lieutenant Lisa Hayes, report on our portside shields," Morrison called out to her. "Down to 30% power, sir," Hayes replied without looking up from her work. "The enemy is focusing all their fire on Section 7. The station shook again as more enemy weapons hit their shields. Sparks flew from damaged equipment, but no one stopped working. Zethkar's voice continued over the battle scene. Captain Morrison listened to the Hegemony surrender offer. He thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. Then he opened a channel to speak directly to the enemy fleet commander. The students watched as Morrison touched a control and spoke into his communication device. His words were clear and strong. "This is Captain Morrison to all Hegemony ships. We have heard your offer. We reject it completely. Kepler Station will not surrender." Several students made sounds of surprise in their different languages. A student with blue fur and 6 legs spoke up. But Commander, they could not win. Why did they refuse to surrender? That is exactly what the hegemony commander thought, Zethkar answered. He was confused. He increased his attack, thinking we had not understood how hopeless our situation was. Our shields were failing. Our weapons were much weaker than theirs. No help was coming. But Morrison began preparing for what he called Plan B. The scene changed to show Morrison gathering his crew of humans and aliens in the main meeting room. Everyone looked tired and scared, but they listened carefully to their captain. Plan B was simple to understand, but crazy to actually do, Zethkar explained. Morrison wanted to turn all our remaining missiles into one giant bomb. Then he planned to crash the entire station into the main hegemony ship. The classroom fell completely silent. Several students looked shocked. A young being with crystal-like skin raised a shaking hand. Commander, that would kill everyone on the station. How could that be a good plan? Zethkar's laugh was bitter and sad. Good plan. No, it was not good. But it was effective. Morrison explained his thinking to all of us. He said if we were going to die anyway, we should make our deaths count for something. We should hurt the enemy so badly that other people could win later. The memory image showed the preparation for the desperate plan. Lieutenant Hayes sat in the pilot's chair, getting ready to steer the station toward the enemy ships. She was only 23 years old, but her face showed no fear. Hayes volunteered to pilot the station during the crash, Zethkar told his students. She knew she would probably die. They all knew, but they were ready to do it anyway. The scene showed the final moments as the station began moving toward the hegemony fleet. The enemy ships scattered in panic when they realized what the humans were doing. Their neat battle formation broke apart as captains tried to get their ships away from the incoming station. The hegemony admiral tried to get his ships back in order, Zethkar continued. But his captains were running away. They could not understand a species that would choose to destroy themselves rather than give up. While they were confused and scattered, our reinforcement fleet arrived. The battle was won not by our weapons, but by human willingness to die for their beliefs. The old commander turned off the display and faced his students directly. Hayes lived through it. The station's emergency systems got her to an escape pod at the last second. But she was prepared to die. They all were. That day, I first understood that humans do not fight like any other species in the galaxy. He moved closer to his students, his scarred form casting long shadows in the classroom light. Most species fight to win. Humans fight because fighting itself has meaning to them. When other beings see that defeat is certain, they look for ways to survive. Humans look for ways to make their defeat cost the enemy as much as possible. A student from the back of the room asked, "What makes them so different?" Zethkar was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his answer. I have studied this question for 15 years. I think it comes from how they see themselves. Most species fight for their governments or their families or their planets. Humans fight for ideas. They fight for concepts like freedom or honor or duty. You cannot negotiate with an idea. You cannot capture a concept. You can only destroy the people who believe in it. He walked to the large window that looked out over the academy training grounds. Below them, students from many different worlds practiced military exercises together. Human instructors worked alongside alien teachers, showing young beings how to fight as one unit. The galaxy learned something important that day at Kepler Station, Zethkar said, still looking out the window. We learned that humans are not just another warrior species. They are something new, something that fights not just with weapons and tactics, but with pure will. The old commander turned back to his class. Tomorrow I will tell you about the ground war on Titan's 7th. You will learn what happens when humans fight in conditions that should kill them. You will understand why other species fear to face them in close combat. As the students prepared to leave, many of them talking quietly about what they had heard, Zethkar remained by the window. He remembered Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Hayes. He remembered their faces when they chose death over surrender. He remembered how their choice had saved thousands of lives and changed the course of the war. The lesson was always the same, but it never got easier to tell. Humans were not the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced, but they were the only ones who treated warfare as something sacred. In a galaxy where most fights ended with negotiations and compromise, humans represented something, both frightening and admirable. They showed what happened when a species decided that some things were worth any sacrifice. Zethkar closed his 4 eyes and said a silent prayer for his human friends who had died. The next day, Commander Zethkar returned to his classroom. The young alien cadets waited eagerly in their seats. Word had spread through the academy about yesterday's lesson. More students had come today, filling every chair and standing along the walls. Zethkar noticed the larger crowd but said nothing about it. He activated his holographic display, and the room filled with the image of a twisted hellscape. Sharp crystal formations jutted from the ground like knives. Poisonous yellow gases swirled through the air. The sky was dark red, and lightning flashed between strange clouds. "This is Titan 7, the old commander began. "A mining world on the edge of our territory. The crystals you see contain rare minerals needed for building starship engines. Both sides wanted control of this planet. What should have been a simple orbital bombardment became something much worse." A student with green scales raised her. "And why not just destroy the planet from space?" "The mining equipment was too valuable," Zethkar explained. "Both armies needed those machines intact, so we had to fight on the surface, in an environment that kills most life forms in minutes." The scene changed to show figures in heavy combat suits moving carefully between the crystal spears. Their suits were thick and bulky, designed to protect against the toxic atmosphere and sharp edges that could cut through metal. The war for Titan 7 lasted 8 months, Zethkar continued. "I arrived with the 3rd wave of reinforcements. By then, the battle had moved underground into the crystal caves. That is where I met Sergeant Danny Cooper." The hologram focused on a stocky human in battered armor. His suit showed the marks of countless battles. Scratches covered his helmet and chest plate, but he moved with the confidence of someone who had survived when others had not. Standing next to him was a smaller figure. Corporal Amy Rodriguez was half Cooper's size, but she moved with the quick grace of a natural fighter. Her suit was newer but already showing signs of hard use. Cooper had been fighting on Titan 7 for 6 months when I arrived, Zethkar told his students. His unit started with 43 soldiers. When I met him, only 12 were still alive. Command had ordered him to rotate out weeks earlier, but he refused to leave while his people were still fighting. The memory showed Cooper briefing the new arrivals in a makeshift bunker carved from crystal rock. His voice came through clearly despite the environmental systems working hard to keep them alive. "The enemy has dug into the deep cave systems," Cooper explained to the mixed group of human and alien soldiers. "Our heavy weapons cannot reach them there. The crystal formations block our targeting systems. We have to go in the old way, room by room, tunnel by tunnel." Rodriguez added her own assessment, pointing to a crude map drawn on the cave wall. "They outnumber us 4-1 down there, but most species cannot handle this kind of fighting. The crystals mess with their natural senses. They get confused and lost. Humans adapt better." Zethkar paused his story to look at his students. What Rodriguez said was true. Most alien species rely on senses that the crystals disrupted. Echolocation, magnetic fields, pheromone trails, all useless in the deep caves. But humans use their eyes and basic tools. The environment that crippled other species barely slowed them down. A young student from a species that used sound to navigate asked, "How did you manage in the caves, Commander?" "Badly," Zethkar admitted. "I could barely move without human help. My natural senses were scrambled. I felt lost and afraid most of the time." But Cooper and Rodriguez treated this as normal. They adapted their tactics and kept fighting. The scene shifted to show the brutal underground war that followed. The caves were a maze of sharp crystal walls and poisonous gas pockets. Equipment failed constantly in the harsh conditions. Food supplies ran low. Medical evacuation was impossible during the frequent crystal storms that swept across the planet's surface. The hologram showed humans fighting with weapons that had been improvised from mining equipment. When their energy rifles stopped working, Cooper used a sharpened piece of crystal like a spear. Rodriguez made explosive charges from industrial supplies meant for mining operations. This was the most savage fighting I have ever seen, Zethkar told his class. The enemy had better weapons, better supplies, and better positions. They controlled the high ground and the main tunnels, but they had never fought humans in close combat before. The memory crystal showed a particular battle that had stayed with Zethkar for years. Rodriguez advanced on enemy positions while her suit leaked atmosphere through multiple tiers. She should have retreated for repairs, but she kept moving forward. Cooper provided covering fire with a rifle that sparked and smoked with each shot. I asked Cooper why they did not fall back to safer positions. Zethkar continued. We were taking heavy casualties. Our supply lines were cut. The smart tactical choice was to retreat and regroup. The hologram showed Cooper's response. The human sergeant looked directly at Zethkar with tired but determined eyes. Sir, we do not have anywhere to fall back to. This is where we make our stand. That answer confused me, the alien commander admitted to his students. In my military training, retreat was always an option when the situation became impossible. You fell back, regrouped, and tried a different approach. But humans see retreat differently. A student with blue skin and large eyes spoke up. How do they see it differently? Zethkar thought carefully about his answer. For most species, territory is something you can lose and retake later. For humans, every piece of ground they give up is a personal failure. They take it personally when they lose territory, even when retreat is the smart choice. The scene showed the continuing underground war. Weeks passed in the hologram, marked by the growing number of scars on the human soldiers and the decreasing number of troops in their unit. But Cooper and Rodriguez never spoke of giving up or falling back. The fighting went on for months. Zethkar continued. The crystal caves became a graveyard for both sides. But something strange began to happen. The enemy forces started to change their tactics. Instead of aggressive attacks, they began to focus on defense. The memory showed enemy soldiers retreating from positions they could have held. When human forces advanced, the aliens fell back without putting up the fierce resistance they had shown earlier. I did not understand this change at first, Zethkar explained. The enemy still had more soldiers and better equipment. They should have been winning, but their commanders were receiving reports from the front lines that disturbed them. The hologram shifted to show captured enemy communications. The alien voices spoke in worried tones about the human fighters they faced. They do not fight like normal soldiers, one enemy officer reported. When we wound them, they keep fighting. When we surround them, they attack instead of surrendering. When we kill their friends, they become more dangerous, not less. Another enemy voice added, Our troops are afraid to enter the deep tunnels. They know the humans are waiting there. Our soldiers say fighting humans is like fighting the crystals themselves, sharp, hard, and unforgiving. Zethkar turned off the hologram and faced his students. After 8 months of fighting, the enemy withdrew from Titan 7. Not because they were defeated in battle, but because their forces could no longer maintain morale. Fighting humans had broken their will to continue. The old commander walked between the rows of students. Cooper and Rodriguez survived the war, though both carried permanent injuries from the crystal caves. When I asked them later why they had fought so hard for such a terrible place, Rodriguez gave me an answer I still remember. He stopped walking and looked directly at his class. She said that every piece of ground they lost meant the enemy was closer to attacking human colonies. Every tunnel they gave up brought the war closer to Earth. They were not just fighting for Titan 7th. They were fighting for every human world behind them. A student near the back raised a tentacle. But Commander, that logic applies to all soldiers, from all species. We all fight to protect our homeworlds. True, Zethkar agreed. But most species fight to protect their homes when the enemy reaches their borders. Humans fight to protect their homes when the enemy is still thousands of light years away. They see every battle as connected to every other battle, every defeat as a step toward ultimate defeat. The classroom was quiet as students absorbed this information. Finally, a young cadet asked, "What happened to the mining equipment? Was it worth the cost?" Zethkar's mandibles clicked in dark humor. The equipment was destroyed in the final months of fighting. Both sides spent more resources on the war than the planet was worth, but that was never really the point for the humans. They fought because fighting was necessary, not because it was profitable. The old commander moved back to the front of the classroom. Tomorrow I will tell you about Firebase Delta. You will learn what happens when humans choose death over surrender. You will understand why the galaxy fears them most when they are cornered and desperate. As the students filed out, many of them walked in thoughtful silence. They had come to learn about military tactics and weapons. Instead, they were learning about the human mind and spirit. They were discovering that some species fight with their hands and tools, while others fight with their entire souls. Zethkar remained in the empty classroom, remembering the crystal caves of Titan 7. He remembered Cooper and Rodriguez, and the T-Commander Zethkar entered the classroom on the third day to find even more students waiting. Young cadets sat on the floor when all chairs were taken. Some hung from the ceiling, using their natural climbing abilities. Word about the human warfare lessons had spread throughout the entire academy. The old alien warrior noticed several senior instructors standing in the back. They had come to hear the stories too. Zethkar nodded to them respectfully before activating his display system. The hologram showed a small military outpost on a barren, rocky world. The base was simple and functional. A few low buildings surrounded by defensive walls, guard towers at each corner. It looked like thousands of other minor installations scattered across the galaxy. "This is Firebase Delta," Zethkar began. It was never meant to hold more than one company of soldiers. The base was a listening post, monitoring enemy fleet movements in the outer sectors. When the hegemony invasion began, evacuation became impossible. A student with silver skin asked, "How many troops were stationed there?" 63 mixed personnel, the commander replied. Mostly technicians and support staff, not frontline fighters. The base commander was a human named Rick Patterson. He had never seen major combat before this battle. The scene shifted to show inside the main command center. A young man with neat brown hair and a clean uniform stood at a communications console. His movements showed nervousness, but his voice remained steady as he coordinated with other bases in the sector. Patterson was only 28 years old, Zethkar explained. He had been commanding Firebase Delta for 6 months. Most of that time was spent filing reports and maintaining equipment. Nothing had prepared him for what was coming. The hologram expanded to show the alien commander himself, though much younger. This version of Zethkar had fewer scars and moved with the confidence of someone who had not yet seen too much war. "I was part of the rapid response team sent to reinforce isolated outposts," he continued. "We arrived at Firebase Delta just hours before the hegemony fleet reached the system. There was no time for evacuation. The scene showed enemy ships appearing in orbit around the planet. Dozens of large warships surrounded the small world. Their weapons could easily destroy the tiny outpost, but they held their fire. The hegemony commander sent a surrender demand," Zethkar told his students. The terms were generous by military standards. All non-combatants would be allowed to leave safely. Combat personnel would be taken as prisoners and treated according to galactic conventions. Young Patterson stood before his mixed crew in the main briefing room. Humans, aliens, and various species from across the Alliance gathered to hear their options. The young commander looked tired but determined. "The hegemony has offered us terms," Patterson announced to his troops. "They want us to surrender the base in exchange for safe passage for civilians and proper treatment for military personnel." A human technician raised his hand. "What are our chances if we fight, sir?" Patterson looked at his tactical display before answering honestly. "Nearly zero. They have 40 ships in orbit. We have defensive weapons that might stop a few landing craft. If we fight, most of us will die." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Then Patterson did something that surprised even Zethkar. He called for a vote. "This decision affects all of us," the young commander said. "Every person on this base has the right to choose. We can surrender and live, or we can fight and probably die. I want everyone to vote." Zethkar paused his story to look at his students. In my culture, military commanders make decisions and subordinates follow orders. The idea of voting on whether to fight or surrender was completely foreign to me. A student with multiple eyes asked, "What was the result of the vote?" "Unanimous," Zethkar replied simply. Every being in that room, human and alien alike, chose to fight. But what happened next showed me something about human leadership I had never seen before. The memory showed Patterson in the communications center, recording a message. His hands were steady as he spoke into the device, even though enemy ships filled the sky above them. "This is Firebase Delta to all Alliance forces," Patterson said calmly. "We are surrounded and outnumbered. Evacuation is not possible. We will hold this position as long as we are able. Tell our families we did our duty." The hologram shifted to show the beginning of the assault. Hegemony dropships descended through the atmosphere, while the small base opened fire with everything they had. The defensive weapons were designed to stop raiders, not a full invasion force. The attack lasted 3 days, Zethkar continued. Patterson had prepared the defense in layers. When the outer walls fell, we retreated to prepared positions inside the base. When those were overrun, we moved to the inner compound. The scene showed the young human commander moving between defensive positions. He appeared wherever the fighting was heaviest, encouraging troops and coordinating the resistance. His inexperience showed in small ways, but his determination inspired everyone around him. "Patterson was wounded on the second day," Zethkar explained, as the hologram showed the commander with his left arm in a makeshift sling. A plasma burst caught him during a counterattack on the communications tower. He could have stayed in the command bunker after that, but he chose to fight alongside his people. A student near the front asked, "Why did the hegemony not just destroy the base from orbit?" "They wanted the listening post intact," the alien commander answered. "The equipment could provide valuable intelligence about Alliance fleet movements, so they had to take the base by ground assault." The memory showed the final day of the siege. Only a handful of defenders remained, surrounded in the central command bunker. Patterson sat at the communications console, his wounded arm hanging, useless at his side. The hegemony commander tried one last time to negotiate, Zethkar told his class. He could not understand why such a small force continued to resist. He offered the same terms as before, plus medical treatment for the wounded. The hologram showed Patterson listening to the surrender offer through his headset. He looked around at the remaining defenders, seeing humans and aliens who had chosen to follow him into almost certain death. Then the young commander did something that shocked both his own troops and the enemy forces. He opened a direct channel to the hegemony fleet and spoke to their admiral personally. "This is Commander Patterson of Firebase Delta," he said clearly. "We have received your offer. We decline. If you want this base, you will have to kill every one of us to take it." The classroom fell completely silent. Several students made sounds of disbelief in their native languages. The hegemony admiral was confused and angry, Zethkar continued. He had offered reasonable terms multiple times. He had demonstrated overwhelming force. He expected rational surrender from a beaten enemy. Instead, he faced humans who had chosen death over defeat. The final scene showed Patterson and the last defenders making their stand in the command center. The young commander fell while defending the main computer systems, ensuring that sensitive information could not be captured. "I was evacuated during the final assault," Zethkar told his students quietly. "Wounded but alive." Patterson stayed behind to destroy the base communications equipment. His sacrifice bought time for Alliance reinforcements to arrive and retake the sector. The old commander turned off the hologram and faced his class. The hegemony learned something important that day. They learned that killing humans and defeating humans are two completely different things. A young cadet asked, "What do you mean, Commander?" Zethkar walked closer to his students. "You can kill a human soldier, but you cannot defeat the idea that human soldier died for." Patterson and his troops died defending Firebase Delta, but their death inspired thousands of other Alliance soldiers to fight harder. The hegemony won the battle but lost the war. An instructor from the back of the room spoke up. "How did this one small battle affect the larger conflict?" News of Firebase Delta spread throughout Alliance space, Zethkar explained. Recruitment increased by 300% in human territories. Other species began to fight with more determination, trying to match human courage. The hegemony found themselves facing an enemy that grew stronger with each defeat. The veteran commander moved to the window overlooking the academy grounds. Patterson was not a great military genius. He made tactical mistakes that cost lives. But he understood something that many experienced commanders do not. Sometimes the most important victory is showing others how to die well. The classroom remained quiet as students processed what they had heard. Finally, a small alien with fur-covered arms asked, "Commander, do all humans fight like this?" Zethkar turned back to his class. Patterson was an ordinary human facing an extraordinary situation. He was scared, inexperienced, and outnumbered. But when the moment came to choose between life and honor, he chose honor. That choice is what makes humans dangerous. As the lesson ended and students began to file out, many of them walked in thoughtful silence. They had expected to learn about weapons and tactics. Instead, they were learning about sacrifice and leadership. They were discovering that the most powerful weapon in any war was not technology or numbers, but the willingness to die for something greater than yourself. Zethik. On the fourth day, Commander Zethkar arrived at his classroom to find it completely packed. Students filled every available space. Senior officers stood along the walls. Even the academy commander had come to listen. News of the human warfare lessons had reached the highest levels of the military academy. Zethkar looked at the enormous crowd and felt the weight of their expectations. Today, he would tell the most difficult story of all, the one that still haunted his dreams after all these years. The holographic display activated, showing a frozen wasteland under a pale blue sun. Snow and ice covered everything as far as the eye could see. Wind howled across empty plains, creating white clouds that blocked visibility. "This is Frost Prime," the old commander began. "A world on the very edge of known space. The planet has no value except for its position. It sits at the junction of three major hyperspace routes. Control Frost Prime, and you control access to an entire sector." The scene shifted to show a military research facility built into the side of a mountain. The base was much larger than Firebase Delta, with multiple levels carved deep into the rock. Heavy weapons and shield generators protected the entrance. The Alliance had established a research station here, Zethkar continued. "We were developing new technologies to help win the war against the hegemony. The base held some of our most important secrets." A student with pale blue skin raised her hand. "What kind of secrets, Commander?" Zethkar paused before answering. "Weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Shield technology that could protect whole planets. Communication systems that could coordinate attacks across the galaxy. If the hegemony captured this base, they would win the war." The hologram showed the interior of the research facility. Hundreds of scientists and technicians worked at complex machines. The corridors buzzed with activity as people rushed between laboratories and control rooms. "I was sent to Frost Prime as military advisor," the alien commander explained. The base was commanded by a human named Colonel Kate Sullivan. She had 30 years of military experience and had never lost a battle. The scene focused on a tall woman with gray hair and sharp green eyes. Colonel Sullivan moved through the base with the confidence of someone who had earned respect through decades of service. Her uniform was perfect, her posture straight, and her voice carried absolute authority. Sullivan was different from the other humans I had worked with, Zethkar told his students. Morrison had been brave, Cooper had been determined, Patterson had been heroic, but Sullivan was something else. She was professional, cold, calculating. The memory showed Sullivan briefing her staff in the main command center. Charts and displays showed hegemony fleet movements throughout the sector. Red markers indicated enemy positions closing in on their location. "The hegemony had discovered our research facility," Sullivan announced to her officers. "They are sending their entire third fleet to capture it. We have perhaps 48 hours before they arrive." A human major asked, "What are our evacuation Options, Colonel. Sullivan looked at the tactical display before answering. Limited. We can evacuate essential personnel and some equipment, but most of our research will fall into enemy hands. The question is whether we allow that to happen. Zethkar paused his story to address his students. At this point, I expected Sullivan to begin evacuation procedures. The smart tactical choice was to save what we could and abandon the rest. But Sullivan had a different plan. The hologram showed the colonel activating a secure communication channel. She spoke directly to Alliance High Command, requesting permission for what she called Protocol 7. I had never heard of Protocol 7, Zethkar admitted. When I asked Sullivan about it, she looked at me with those cold green eyes and said it was a human military contingency, a final option when all others had failed. The scene shifted to show frantic activity throughout the base. Scientists worked desperately to complete their research, while soldiers prepared defensive positions. But something else was happening, too. Technical teams were installing strange devices throughout the facility. Sullivan was preparing to destroy the entire base, the commander explained. Not just the research, but the mountain itself. She planned to create an artificial avalanche that would bury everything under millions of tons of rock and ice. A student with multiple arms asked, "But Commander, what about the people inside the base?" Zethkar's mandibles clicked slowly. That was exactly what I asked Sullivan. Her answer was simple. Anyone who chose to stay would die with the base. Anyone who wanted to live could leave on the evacuation ships. The memory showed Sullivan addressing the entire base population over the communication system. Her voice was calm and matter-of-fact as she explained the situation. "The hegemony will be here in 36 hours, she announced. "I am implementing Protocol 7. This base will be destroyed rather than captured. Evacuation ships will depart in 6 hours. Anyone who wishes to leave should report to the landing bays immediately." The hologram showed the response to this announcement. Some people rushed toward the evacuation points, gathering personal belongings and important data, but others remained at their posts, continuing to work as if nothing had changed. I was shocked by how many chose to stay, Zethkar told his class. Scientists who could have escaped with their research, soldiers who could have fought another day, technical staff who had families waiting for them. More than half the base population volunteered to die. The scene showed Sullivan moving through the base, speaking personally with those who had chosen to remain. She did not try to convince them to leave. Instead, she thanked them for their service and asked what they needed to complete their work. I asked one of the human scientists why he was staying. Zethkar continued. Dr. Robert Hayes was working on a new type of shield generator. He could have taken his research and continued the work elsewhere. The memory showed a middle-aged man with thick glasses and graying beard. Hayes looked up from his workstation when Zethkar approached him. The research is 90% complete, Hayes explained. If I can finish it in the next 30 hours, this new shield technology could protect every Alliance world. If I leave now, it might take years to recreate this work. How many people will die waiting for those years? Another human, a young communications officer named Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, gave a similar explanation. I know the hegemony communication codes. If I stay and monitor their fleet coordination, I can give the Alliance fleet vital intelligence about their attack patterns. Zethkar turned to his students. These people were not soldiers trained for combat. They were scientists and technicians. But they understood that their deaths could save millions of lives. So they chose to die. The final day showed the last frantic hours before the hegemony arrival. The evacuation ships departed, carrying those who had chosen to live. Less than 200 people remained in a base designed for over 500. Sullivan spent the last hours ensuring that everyone knew their role, Zethkar continued. The scientists worked to complete their research. The soldiers prepared to hold the hegemony forces as long as possible. The technical staff made final preparations for the base destruction. The hologram showed the moment when hegemony ships appeared in orbit. Dozens of enemy vessels surrounded the planet while landing craft descended toward the research facility. The small garrison opened fire with everything they had. The battle lasted 6 hours, the alien commander told his audience. Sullivan's people fought with desperate courage, but they were vastly outnumbered. When the hegemony forces finally broke into the base, they found something they did not expect. The scene showed enemy soldiers discovering laboratories filled with completed research data. Instead of the partially finished work they expected to capture, they found fully functional prototypes of new weapons and defenses. Sullivan had gambled everything on those final hours, Zethkar explained. Her people had worked until the last possible moment, completing research that should have taken months. When the base was finally overrun, they transmitted everything to Alliance forces before destroying the originals. The memory showed Colonel Sullivan in the command center as enemy forces closed in. She stood calmly at the main control panel, her hand hovering over a single red button. Sullivan's final transmission went out on all frequencies, Zethkar said quietly. The hegemony fleet heard it. The Alliance reinforcements heard it. Every ship in the sector heard her last words. The hologram showed Sullivan speaking into her communicator with the same professional tone she had used throughout the crisis. This is Colonel Sullivan to all forces. Frost Prime research has been completed and transmitted. The base will now be destroyed to deny it to the enemy. Tell Earth that we kept faith with our duty. The scene ended with a brilliant flash as the mountain collapsed in on itself. Millions of tons of rock and ice buried the research facility forever, along with everyone inside it. Zethkar turned off the display and faced his silent audience. The hegemony captured nothing but rubble. The Alliance received shield technology that protected their worlds for the rest of the war. 200 people died to save millions. The classroom remained completely quiet for a long moment. Finally, a young cadet asked, "Commander, why do humans make such sacrifices?" The old alien warrior thought carefully about his answer. "I have studied this on the fifth and final day." Commander Zethkar entered his classroom to find it filled beyond capacity. Students had arrived hours early to secure seats. The entire Academy faculty had come to hear the conclusion of his human warfare lessons. Even military officers from other worlds had traveled to the Academy specifically for this final lecture. The old alien warrior looked out at the sea of expectant faces from dozens of different species. Young cadets sat next to experienced commanders. Scientists stood beside soldiers. All of them wanted to understand what these stories meant for the future of galactic civilization. Zethkar did not activate his holographic display this time. Instead, he walked to the center of the room and began to speak in his quiet, measured voice. "For 4 days, I have told you stories about humans in war," he began. "You have heard about Captain Morrison, who chose mutual destruction over surrender. You have learned about Sergeant Cooper and Corporal Rodriguez, who fought in impossible conditions. You have witnessed Commander Patterson, who led his people to death with honor. You have seen Colonel Sullivan, who sacrificed everything to complete her mission." The commander paused and looked around the room. "Now you want to know what these stories mean. You want to understand why I have spent 4 days teaching you about human warfare. The answer is simple. Everything has changed." A senior instructor from the Kethmoran Military Academy raised one of his 4 arms. "Commander, what do you mean by everything?" Zethkar turned to face the instructor directly. For 10,000 years, galactic warfare has followed predictable patterns. Species fight until one side gains advantage. Then negotiations begin. Treaties are signed. Borders are redrawn. War ends, and peace returns. This is how civilized beings conduct conflicts. He walked slowly between the rows of students as he continued. Humans do not follow these patterns. They do not fight to gain advantage or negotiate better terms. They fight to completely destroy their enemies or die trying. There is no middle ground with humans. A young student with silver skin asked, "But Commander, surely humans can be reasoned with during conflicts?" The old warrior stopped walking and considered the question carefully. Humans are very reasonable before wars begin and after wars end. During peacetime, they are among the most diplomatic species in the galaxy. They prefer negotiation to conflict. They seek compromise and cooperation. He resumed his slow pace around the room. But once humans decide that war is necessary, something changes in them. They stop thinking like individuals and start thinking like a single organism. Every human becomes part of a larger fighting force that will not stop until the enemy is completely defeated. An alien officer wearing the insignia of a fleet commander spoke up. Are you saying that humans cannot be defeated? Zethikar's mandibles clicked in what might have been a smile. Humans can be killed. Human ships can be destroyed. Human worlds can be conquered. But the idea of humanity cannot be defeated as long as even one human remains alive. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this statement. Finally, a young cadet asked, "What makes them so different from other species?" The commander walked to the large window overlooking the academy training grounds. Below them, human instructors worked alongside alien students, teaching them advanced military tactics and strategy. Most species fight for specific goals, Zethkar explained. Territory, resources, political advantage, survival. When those goals become impossible to achieve, they stop fighting. Humans fight for concepts that cannot be captured or destroyed. Freedom, honor, duty, justice. You cannot negotiate with a concept. He turned back to his audience. Captain Morrison did not die to save Kepler Station. He died to prove that humans would never surrender. Sergeant Cooper did not fight in the Crystal Caves to capture mining equipment. He fought to show that humans could endure anything. Commander Patterson did not sacrifice Firebase Delta for tactical advantage. He died to inspire other humans to fight harder. A professor of military history raised her hand. Commander, are you suggesting that human warfare is purely psychological? Not purely, but significantly, Zethkar replied. Human weapons are good but not exceptional. Human tactics are effective but not revolutionary. Human technology is advanced but not superior to other major species. What makes humans dangerous is that they treat every battle as if the survival of their entire species depends on the outcome. The veteran commander activated a small display showing casualty statistics from various galactic conflicts. Look at these numbers. In every war involving humans, enemy forces suffer higher than expected losses. Not because human weapons are more deadly, but because human soldiers fight longer and harder than military planners anticipate. He changed the display to show recruitment data. After every human defeat, their military recruitment increases. Other species see high casualties and lose motivation to fight. Humans see high casualties and become more determined to win. 8K. Senior Cadet asked, how should other species adapt to fighting alongside humans? Zethkar walked closer to the group of students. First, understand that humans will never retreat unless ordered to do so by their own commanders. Do not expect them to fall back when the situation becomes hopeless. They will fight where they stand until they die or win. He held up one of his 4 hands. Second, provide what humans cannot provide for themselves. Strategic thinking when they become too focused on immediate battles. Supply lines when they advance too quickly. Medical support when they ignore their own injuries. Another hand went up. Third, remember that human loyalty works both ways. They will die for you as readily as they die for their own kind. But they expect the same commitment in return. Never abandon humans in battle unless you want them to consider you an enemy. A final hand rose. Fourth, do not try to match human intensity. You will exhaust yourself before the battle is won. Instead, use your own species' strengths to complement human weaknesses. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as students discussed these points with each other. Zethkar waited for the noise to die down before continuing. But the most important lesson is this, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. Humans have changed the nature of galactic warfare forever. Before humans joined the Alliance, wars were limited conflicts with negotiated endings. Now every war has the potential to become a fight to the death. He moved back to the center of the room. The hegemony learned this lesson too late. They expected humans to fight like other species. When they discovered their mistake, they had already committed to total war with an enemy that considered total war their natural state. A fleet admiral who had been listening from the back spoke up. What happened to the hegemony, Commander? Zethkar's expression grew grim. They sued for peace after losing 60% of their fleet and 40% of their territory. But humans had decided that the hegemony represented a threat to galactic freedom. So humans rejected the peace offer and continued fighting until the hegemony government collapsed completely. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Several students asked questions at once until Zethkar raised his hands for silence. The war could have ended 3 years earlier with a negotiated settlement, he continued. Millions of lives could have been saved. But humans do not fight for temporary peace. They fight for permanent solutions to permanent problems. As the lesson neared its end, a young cadet asked one final question. Commander, what advice would you give to someone who might have to fight against humans? The old alien warrior was quiet for a long moment, remembering all the battles he had witnessed, all the human friends he had lost, all the impossible victories he had seen achieved through sheer determination. Do not fight humans unless you are prepared to kill every single one of them, he said finally, because if you leave even one alive, that human will find a way to continue the war, and eventually, that human will find a way to win. As the students filed out of the classroom, for the last time, many of them walked in thoughtful silence. They had come to learn about military tactics and weapons. Instead, they had learned about the human spirit and what it meant for the future of the galaxy. Zethkar remained in the empty room, looking out at the training grounds where human and alien officers worked together to prepare for whatever conflicts lay ahead. He had spent 5 days teaching young minds about human warfare, but he knew the real lesson was simpler than all his stories. Humans had not just joined the galactic community, they had changed it forever. And every species in the galaxy would have to decide whether they wanted humans as allies or enemies. Because neutrality was no longer an option in a universe where humans were willing to fight for their beliefs until the very end.